Direct Connection is made by MPT to serve all of our diverse communities and is made possible by the generous support of our members. Thank you. Live from Maryland Public Television, this is Direct Connection with Jeff Salkin.
Good evening. Welcome to your Direct Connection. Tonight we connect you with Maryland U.S. Senator Chris Van Hollen. One of the topics we're talking about, the bombshell Mueller report that left President Trump claiming victory.
It was just announced there was no collusion with Russia, the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. There was no collusion with Russia. There was no obstruction and none whatsoever. And it was a complete and total exoneration.
Joining us now from Capitol Hill, Senator Chris Van Hollen. Sir, thank you for being with us. In your view, complete exoneration, partial exoneration, or neither of those?
Well, Jeff, certainly not complete exoneration. Look, here are the facts. Mueller determined that Russia did, in fact, interfere in the 2016 elections, something that President Trump has continued to deny. I think the country is relieved that he did not find evidence that the president engaged in a criminal conspiracy with Putin and the Russians. But at the same time, he said he could not make a final determination on whether the president tried to obstruct justice. He did not exonerate the president on the question of whether the president interfered in the Mueller investigation. So the American people deserve answers on all of this, which is why it's imperative that the full report be made public so that the American people can see exactly what's in it and people can draw their own conclusions.
So a lot of focus is shifting towards the obstruction issue. Help us understand that. I mean, the conspiracy with Russia idea was easily digestible. The obstruction issue is a little bit more complicated. Was it all about the decision to fire Comey?
It was not only about the decision to fire Comey. It has to do with efforts to interfere with witnesses, potentially. For example, including dangling pardons out in front of witnesses. Let's take, for example, the issue with the fact that the president was pursuing a Trump Tower deal in Russia during the election. And we all know that he didn't tell the truth about that. He lied about it. That wasn't criminal that he was engaged in that project. He obviously didn't want the American people to know. And if he tried to interfere with witnesses and get them to lie about that issue because he didn't want it to become public, then that would be an obstruction of justice if he tried to get them to perjure themselves. So there are a whole range of issues around the investigation itself, and that is why Mueller said, he looked at both sides and didn't make a final determination. I think people are very troubled that the Attorney General took only 48 hours to do that, and obviously that's not a credible conclusion. This is somebody who was handpicked by the president. I'm talking about Attorney General Barr. And even before he was nominated, he had written pieces, an open letter, indicating that he did not believe a president could be held liable for obstruction of justice. So apparently that was a foregone conclusion on his part. This is all the more reason, Jeff, why the American public needs to get this full report and get it now.
Is the American public, though, going to run out of interest in this? You may have seen the polling numbers on Mr. Mueller himself, and his investigation had been softening as it approached the 2-year mark. Are Americans ready to just close the book on this?
Well, I think the American public has lots of issues on its mind that go beyond the Mueller report. I mean, these are issues that we're also trying to work with on Capitol Hill, including, funding our education system, dealing with healthcare issues, dealing with campaign finance reform, modernizing our infrastructure. But Congress has a constitutional obligation to provide oversight and accountability. And so that's just part of the job. And I'm confident, at least in the House, where the Democrats have the majority, they'll be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. They'll be able to do their accountability job and also continue to work on bills. After all, they've already passed a major piece of legislation on gun safety requiring national criminal background checks. They passed a major election reform bill to make sure that people have a full right to vote and that we get big money out of politics. My goodness, I wish the United States Senate would be doing that. I've been trying to get Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader, to bring those bills up for a vote. So the point is that the House can do both at the same time. They can pass important legislation and live up to their oversight responsibilities.
Let me remind our viewers, if you have a question for the senator, you can give us a call. We'll have the number up on the screen. You can also email a question. The email address is livequestions@mpt.org. Over the last 24, 48 hours, I mean, does this take a little bit of the wind out of the sails of the strongest anti-Trumpers? Does it deflate some of the energy that had built up in the Democratic Party?
Well, Jeff, I think the record of this president really speaks for itself, both in terms of style and substance. And this is clearly a president that campaigned on dividing the country in a very vicious way, dividing people racially, ethnically, across religious lines. And nothing that's happened in the last 48 hours changes the fact that he is run as the big divider. I mean, that is the way he sustains his political base. And when it comes to legislation, a lot of us thought that maybe we'd be able to work on an infrastructure modernization plan together. That's something that the president talked about. But if you look at the budget he just proposed to Congress, he actually cuts our national investment in modernizing our infrastructure. So I don't think this changes the views the public has on the performance of this president. So I think a lot of people around the country were waiting for the Mueller report, but they were really in their everyday lives, focused on these other issues that we should be focused on.
The last thing I wanted to ask on this investigation is whether it changes anyone's mind about whether there should be a special counsel law. As I understand it, previous investigations have been under a law that has expired, and this operated just within the rules of the Justice Department. In your view, did it operate correctly?
I think it did. We know that the Russians interfered in our election. I mean, that undermines the integrity of our democratic process. We know that there was a lot of information suggesting that the president or members of his team had been part of that. But even putting that aside, digging further into the Russian interference in our elections is important. And this is the way that we try to get the facts out. Creating this special counsel position, I think, was very important. And, the president spent the last more than a year talking about a witch hunt. And at least on the question of criminal conspiracy to collude, obviously Mueller did his job as an independent individual. Now, he also did his job as an independent individual in saying that he did not exonerate the president on the question of obstruction of justice. And that's why that remains a very open area that Congress has a responsibility to look at. I mean, you can't have a president who's engaged in obstructing justice and obstructing the law. Now, look, I haven't seen the report. That's why we need the report. I would point out that in the House, they voted overwhelmingly on a bipartisan basis to require that the report be made public, to ask that the report be made public. We've tried to do the same thing here in the Senate as recently as today. But Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader, blocked a vote on calling for the report to be made public. But I think it's incumbent that the Attorney General do that. And I can assure you, Jeff, that if he doesn't, the House, where you have a Democratic majority, they will subpoena the information they need.
Let's take some phone calls starting in Montgomery County. This is Darlene. Darlene, thanks for the call. Go ahead.
Yes. I would like to know if there was no obstruction of justice, why did Bob Mueller indict Roger Stone And why was Jerry?
Darlene, I'm losing you, but I think we got the gist of it. Senator?
Well, this is a good question. I mean, Roger Stone was indicted. I believe the trial will be later this year. And I don't know all of the information behind that indictment. Obviously, Roger Stone was alleged to have been involved potentially on the leaking, the WikiLeaks information. But that is another reason why it's important for the American people to see the full report. Look, what we had from Attorney General Barr was just a very few findings. Among those findings, of course, by the Mueller team was that he did not exonerate the president on the issue of obstruction of justice. So we need to dig into those. There's no reason to ask, there's no way to answer the caller's good question without full information.
This is an email question from Tom, who says the Russians did not collude with Trump. It was the FBI that spied on the Trump administration. Thoughts on the whole deep state, the so-called deep state angle of this? I mean, say for a minute that there actually was no conspiracy, no collusion. Is it possible that something sinister happened within the U.S. government itself?
There's absolutely zero evidence that people within the U.S. government were conspiring to, fabricate a case against Donald Trump for political purposes. Zero evidence of that. Look, the reason this case was brought to begin with was there was a whole lot of suggestion, and there was evidence of possible collusion. I mean, there were all sorts of signs that something may have happened. The FBI had independent information, and they decided to investigate. If they have independent information of wrongdoing on some other kind of case, they should investigate. What should not happen is members of neither political party should be trying to abuse power by directing the FBI to investigate their political adversaries. That is a total abuse of power. And when the president calls upon the Justice Department to go after Hillary Clinton or whoever it may be, that is an abuse of presidential power. The FBI and the Justice Department should open investigations where they have independent evidence of wrongdoing, no matter where that leads them, and in whatever political direction or apolitical direction. That's the way the process is supposed to work. And so far, it appears that that is the way the process has worked.
Phone call from Baltimore City. This is George. George, thank you for calling. Go ahead.
Hi, Senator Van Hollen. I'm just amazed at what you just said. You obviously aren't up to speed in that President Obama's administration told the Justice Department that they were not going to pursue prosecuting Hillary. Your Muslim member of the House of Representatives makes anti-Semitic statements, and you criticize the president when your party can't even muster a simple "no, that's wrong."
Tom, thank you for the phone call. Let me let the senator respond.
Well, in fact, just on that last point, the House of Representatives did pass a resolution condemning anti-Semitism and hate and bigotry of any kind. And I don't think we should ever excuse hate, whatever form it takes. And so that's exactly what the House of Representatives did. I would hope that the caller and others would agree that in our country we should not tolerate any kind of division and hate based on religion or race or ethnicity. It's important to pull the country together. And so that is why the House acted in unison to call out, to pass that resolution in a comprehensive way.
Let me switch gears for a minute and ask you about something extremely local. Many of your constituents and your old constituents when you were in Congress, in the House, drive all the time on the Baltimore-Washington Parkway, where the speed limit has been lowered on an emergency basis because it's so full of potholes. It's like, a dirt road where you slow down to not destroy the vehicle. What can happen there? I remember your predecessor, Senator Mikulski, talking about having actually spent decades trying to get control of that road from the federal government to Maryland. What needs to happen here?
So, Jeff, the current situation on the BW Parkway, the portion of it that is controlled by the National Park Service, is unacceptable. As you just said, there are potholes on that road. It's unsafe, which is why I've raised the alarm on this issue with the National Park Service, telling them they've got to act on an emergency basis to fill those potholes. Bringing the speed limit down to 40 miles per hour is not the solution to a road that needs all these repairs. We just had a meeting with them late last week, and I think that there's promising information. In other words, I believe we're making progress. I think they fully understand now that it's an emergency situation. So stay tuned on that issue.
Very good. Let's take a phone call from Montgomery County. This is Mark. Mark, thank you for calling. Go ahead.
Yes, good evening. This is an election integrity issue again. Two related questions. I know when I buy a car, I don't just kick a tire. I look under the hood. When we look at voting machines, we don't just look at the surface, we look at the software. Second related point is, we know the Russians were involved in misinformation and hacking. And when Mr. Manafort was sharing polling data, was that for misinformation and hacking purposes? And do you think the Mueller report addressed this issue?
All right. Thank you very much, Senator.
Well, that's a very good question. And again, that's exactly why the American people and the Congress need to see the report, because there are lots of questions along those same lines, right? We know that Manafort did meet with Russians and apparently shared polling information with them. So this is another reason why, in order to really give the American people confidence, we need to see the full report. It's interesting the caller raised the issue of voting machines. People may know that there was actually a Russian company that owned, had an interest, a controlling interest in a firm called ByteGrid, which actually provided support services to the Maryland election system. The FBI found out about this, and Senator Cardin and I reported it to federal officials who looked into this. There's good news on both fronts. First, that the FBI and others found that the Russians did not use that leverage that they have to interfere with the Maryland election. So that did not happen. But we also did get rid of the Russian ownership interests because it obviously poses a risk. And we just introduced legislation to make sure that across the country, Russia or any adversary cannot have a controlling interest in our election infrastructure. That leaves us much too vulnerable. And so that's bipartisan legislation I introduced with Senator Collins and Senator Cardin and others to make sure this never happens again anywhere in the United States where a Russian entity controls or has a controlling interest in any part of our election infrastructure.
Here's an email question. First thing the viewer says is Happy Maryland Day. Second thing is, do you have faith that Attorney General Barr will permit SDNY, Southern District of New York, to continue their investigations related to Trump and the family business? And we really haven't talked about that part of the Justice Department.
Well, actually, the caller's question raises the important point that Mueller did essentially direct these other courts or provide his findings in related but still different cases to other federal courts, U.S. district courts, including the Southern District in New York. That, of course, is where the case about the president, individual one, they called him, being involved in a campaign finance cover-up effort. That is where a number of other cases have been referred, and those are ongoing investigations. I certainly hope the Attorney General will not interfere in those cases. That would be a totally inappropriate obstruction of justice on his part. I will point out that the House of Representatives is also going to investigate some of the dealings between the Trump organization and various Russian entities, including financing from Deutsche Bank and other banks, and questions of money laundering. Again, this is just an investigation, and the facts, let the facts fall where they may.
Just a few minutes left with Senator Chris Van Hollen live from his office on Capitol Hill. Let's go back to the phones. Cecil County, this is Mike. Mike, go ahead with your question. Wait for the delay. Mike, you're on. Last chance. Mike, what's your question? All right, let's move on there. I wanted to ask your thoughts on the Democratic presidential field as it's evolving. A lot of people running already. Former Vice President Biden apparently heading in that direction. What do you hope comes out of this? I would guess that you're not endorsing anybody just yet.
Well, Jeff, we have a big field of candidates, as you just indicated. In fact, it seems to be growing by the day. And this is the time when everybody's got to go out and make their case to the voters across the country. So you're right. I'm watching this process unfold. I'm going to be very engaged. I think it's very important that we have a candidate that can speak to all the issues that matter to the American people and to a broad cross-section of the country. I have urged all the candidates to follow Senator Kamala Harris's example of setting up her headquarters in Baltimore. We want all of them to move their headquarters to the state of Maryland. But they're big, important issues. We just got a sense of some of the big issues, how they impact Maryland with the Trump budget. President Trump submitted his budget. Republicans on Capitol Hill have joined Democrats in saying it's dead on arrival because it disinvests from many important priorities: education, medical research. It essentially wipes out the Chesapeake Bay program. It takes it from $73 million to 7.3, a 90% cut. It cuts NIH, which does really important work in looking for treatments and cures for diseases that impact every American family. So these budgets have real consequences. They're a reflection of our priorities. So as we head into the presidential election, there are a whole lot of important issues at stake, and we're going to have a full debate. I'm looking forward to it.
Last phone call, Washington County. This is Lynn. Lynn, go ahead with your question.
Yes, I really have two questions. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
The first is it disingenuous to ask to release the full Mueller report when there might be secret testimonies in it and other people's lives might be damaged while one is seeking to damage the president? That's the first question.
Second part.
The second part goes farther back than that. It goes to the FISA warrant system and the fact that the FISA warrants to spy on the Trump campaign were sought with false information and lies by the FBI, the Department of Justice.
Lynn, we've got to leave it there.
Let me be interested in that side.
Let me get you an answer. Thanks for the phone call.
Well, so on the second point, that may be covered in the report. I don't know whether Mueller and his team went into the FISA warrants and the information that went into those warrants. Maybe it's in there. That's another reason I think the public has an interest in seeing the reports. I will say that with respect to classified information, secret information, that can be provided to Congress through appropriate channels. There is a question with respect to some of the grand jury testimony, and that does need to be taken into account in terms of providing the information. But as we all know, this report is very long, and what we've received so far is just a few pages from the Attorney General. So there's still a lot of information that needs to come out as to how Mueller and his team formed their conclusions. And again, they concluded on the one hand that there was not a criminal conspiracy, or they didn't find there was a criminal conspiracy to collude with the Russians on the part of the president. They also said they did not exonerate the president on the question of obstruction of justice. So I think all of us have an interest as a country in seeing the result of this more than a year-long investigation, almost 2 years, I believe.
United States Senator Chris Van Hollen joining us live tonight on MPT from his office on Capitol Hill. Sir, thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it.
It's great to be with you, Jeff, and the callers. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Join us Thursday at this time for Your Money and Business. We'll find out the impact of all of the tax changes, and we'll get some information on where you can get some free tax help. That's Thursday at 7. Have a good night.
This program was made by MPT to serve all of our diverse communities.